Hello, it's I Love Azorius here, coming at you with a quick video for today. Trying to get into more video making, that kind of stuff. And I was inspired to do this video because I recently was watching. Oh, where did it go? Back here. This video, this Chapin seminar video from Star City Games. Basically, this is a next level deck building. Chapin's wonderful book. He's doing a seminar on it, and in this video he's talking a lot about modern deck building, that kind of stuff, particularly with the aggro decks of the time. He mentioned that modern was a somewhat hostile format to aggro decks as a whole, and so if you wanted to play an aggro deck, you need to keep the kind of context of the format in mind. What kinds of cards were people playing at that time against aggro decks? So this video came out around the time when Wild Nacatl was recently unbanned in Standard. Let's just pull that up on the screen. So Wild Nacatl is a 1-mana 3/3 most of the time, and so people were playing a lot of answers like Lightning Bolt. Everyone knows Lightning Bolt does 3 damage. And Wall of Omens, which could, effectively block the Wild Nacatl. So Chapin gives some examples like Affinity. A lot of Affinity's threats flew, so they could, fly right on over the Wall of Omens, don't care about that. Or they were resistant to Lightning Bolt because no particular threat was important to the plan if you had a good draw. You could lose a threat or two to some Lightning Bolts and still be in a fine spot. He also mentions White-Green Aggro, which played Loxodon Smiter, which was a 4/4 for 3. So again, Lightning Bolt can't kill it, and it does not get stonewalled by the Wall of Omens. So the way that I see this kind of applying to the modern day is the spells in Standard. So I'm just going to get right into it. My deck of choice, obviously, is Blue-White Flash, playing cheap threats that you can play on either your turn or the opponent's, and some, resilient card advantage engines as well. But I'm always going to play Blue-White. So just getting right into it, you have Cut Down, a cheap, effective removal spell. I think part of the reason why this deck is so strong right now and why I've been having a lot of success with it is because Cut Down is more of a necessary evil against this deck than anything else. Few of our threats line up very well against Cut Down. Getting Fairy, Denic, or Tidebinder Cut Down is bad, but as we'll talk about, we have ways to counteract that, growing them with Wedding, Virtue, a map token, or Emperor, can fizzle a Cut Down, and just kind of as a whole, aggro and Standard here, a lot of these decks are kind of Cut Down check decks. Demure Midrange, kind of a Cut Down check when they play a Bat, or if they end step a 2-drop and then untap and play a Gix, you kind of need to have a Cut Down. You're going to start falling very far behind. Mono Red, for a similar reason, there's a very quick deck presenting threats that often cost more than Cut Down, such as Bloodthirsty Adversary, and are weak to getting Cut Down. Bant Poison is a lot of the same. Some of their draws are very ineffective if you're able to pick off the 1 or 2 creatures that they're relying on, and Gruul Aggro is probably the most pronounced example of this, where if you cut down a Questing Druid or Picnic Ruiner, or one of the few creatures that they actually run in their deck, their whole strategy can fall apart. So aggro as a whole, I at least in my experience, is kind of just a lot of cut down check decks. And I consider this deck more of an aggro deck than anything else. So it's kind of nice that we have some built-in protection against cut down. As I said before, Schooner, general flash threats, Wedding, all that kind of stuff. Go for the Third is kind of in the same camp as Cut Down. I'd say on the whole it's a little more effective against this deck, but again, a lot of our best threats don't particularly care about it. It's very awkward against Steel Seraph and Schooner because it can't target them, and then it doesn't trade particularly well against some of the other threats here. In addition, kind of the token theme, wedding in particular, both sides of wedding are extremely effective against cut down and go for the throat. You often don't care if you get a particular token killed by one of these cards, as they're trading an entire card for a third of your card, that kind of stuff. So already you see that the two most played spells in Standard are somewhat effective against this deck, but not as effective against this deck as against a lot of the other aggro decks. Negate is fairly effective against this kind of deck. Most of our big threats are non-creatures, but again, this definitely can have a lineup problem where if we have a curve of like Dennick into Tidebinder and our opponent's leaving up mana for only negate, then their card becomes pretty textless pretty quickly. They might need to tap out on a future turn to answer our creature threats that we've put onto the board, and then you can stick your non-creature threat if you're particularly worried about a card like negate. So duress is kind of a similar thing, but it's more proactive, so I think it's a little more effective against this deck. Duress is a solid sideboard card against this deck, but again, there are certain hands where duress doesn't do too much. Dennick, in particular, is often a threat that the black decks wish it could duress, and they cannot. Destroy Evil is pretty effective against this kind of deck. We really rely on Wedding Announcement and Virtue in a lot of matchups, and it tagging Schooner as well is not ideal. Knockout Blow is, I believe, one of the most common overall sideboard cards, just because mono red is so prevalent and this card is so effective against it. This is not particularly mana efficient against our deck and usually doesn't come in against us, so it's already good to see we're dodging some of the sideboard hate here, aimed at some of the other aggro decks. Disdainful Stroke is not aimed at the aggro decks. It's aimed at different decks, but again, Disdainful Stroke is very ineffective against this kind of deck. It pretty much only counters Virtue and Emperor, so probably not going to be coming in against us. Anoint with Affliction is particularly annoying for this deck because it's a cheap removal spell. It's able to actually kill Schooner and is able to kill a prototype Steel Seraph, which is very annoying. So I think probably the most effective spell from this list here sits down at number 8 in only 31% of decks. So good, but not great. And I feel like that kind of showcases some of the power of this deck, that this is the most effective card out of all of these. Lithomantic is another one that's a sideboard staple in this format, particularly because it deals with Rafine Scheming Seer so effectively, as well as the Deep Cavern Bat. You can see it kills everything in this deck pretty much except the Lord Skitter. Anyway, the Barrage is an often sideboard card. Usually, if people are constructing sideboards against blue and or white decks, they're going to start, if they're a red deck, they're going to start with multiple copies of this. Barrage is okay, but not great against this deck. Obviously, it trading for a Tidebinder or Dennick is pretty good if they can line it up against a Schooner, if we have to crew on their turn. And it's pretty good against Emperor as well, though of course we will get value out of it because you can use its ability at any time. But the problem with the Lithomantic Barrage is we can protect ourselves from it due to the nature of this deck, which some other decks are not quite as good at doing. Since a lot of our threats have flash, so we're able to dodge the sorcery speed of that card. Additionally, cards like Wedding Announcement, they make multiple threats, so the impact of a Lithomantic Barrage is really negated. Virtue of Loyalty as well. They can trade 1-for-1 with the Knight token at a good rate for them, but it leaves behind the Virtue, which can cause our other threats to be larger threats down the line. So this is kind of similar to Cut Down, where people probably need to leave it in against you and or bring it in, but it's not particularly effective in most spots. Make Disappear is kind of I put it in pretty similar camp to Negate overall, so I'm not going to cover that too much. Gix's command is good against this kind of deck because we are a token-based deck, so the destroy each creature with power 2 or less mode, it can be quite effective against us, but again, this is an expensive sorcery, so you're often able to play around it or negate the effects of it. The Wandering Emperor is, good against our deck, but we also play it, so, you have spots where you can go Emperor for Emperor, and it's also pretty expensive, so it can get caught by our own make disappears, or just the fact that we're a flash deck is effective in playing around it. Liliana is not very effective against this deck. We don't particularly care about going 1-for-1, and cards like Dennick, Schooner, and Wedding Announcement are effective at making up the card disadvantage that Liliana can bring. Sunfall, this is part of why the domain matchup is so good. Sunfall is honestly kind of a complete joke against this deck. It's an expensive sorcery, first of all, so it gets tagged by our negates out of the board, and the make disappears. And then also, Sunfall just does, it only kills creatures, right? This deck has Schooner. Schooner is an artifact. Wedding Announcement is enchantment. Wandering Emperor is a planeswalker. And then Murex is an anchorage as lands, all of which dodge Sunfall. Additionally, a lot of the threats in this deck can be played on the end step, so if you're concerned about a Sunfall, you can dodge it in that way as well. And then Breach Multiverse, same thing, pretty expensive. Cruelty of Gix, kind of a similar thing. It's pretty expensive, and the ultimate of it cannot be used if there's a Dennick out, and Tidebinder is very effective at stifling the chapters of it. Brotherhood's End is pretty solid against this deck, but again, we are kind of attacking on different angles. If you have a Schooner out, that dodges Brotherhood's End and flash threats as well. Lockdown, again, can be pretty effective against this kind of deck, but you have answers to it in Destroy Evil and Get Lost, and you have permanents with mana value more than 3, which will stay around through Lockdown, all that kind of stuff. So those are the top spells here, and this is kind of a quick deck building exercise here. Part of the reason why I've been having so much success with this deck is because many of these top spells are ineffective against this kind of deck in my mind. So this is one of the things that I keep in mind whenever I build a deck for a tournament. That kind of stuff. I think it's pretty important to have your cards not line up, or to have your opponent's cards not line up very well against a lot of the threats that you're bringing to a tournament when you're playing more of an aggressive deck. I like to check this as often as I can, and I hope this video has been of use to you somehow. I encourage you to go take your favorite deck in your favorite format, pull up this Staples page on MTG Goldfish, and kind of go through it one by one and see how your deck, see how it lines up against your deck. Is there a way that you can make your deck, your favorite deck, more effective against this kind of thing, to increase your tournament success? So, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.